Bennett, if I may start with you, you've made your name as a very distinctive director, and dealing with rather complex characters. Truman Capote, of course, Billy Bean in Moneyball, and notably here, I suppose, Mr. DuPont. How did you first come across this story? I mean, this is an extraordinary story, but I think most of us on this side of the water don't really know much about it. Did you?
I had never heard about the story until a stranger approached me in a store and had an envelope with newspaper clippings in it and said, "I think that you're going to want to make a film about this story." And I think most people in America are unfamiliar with it or only vaguely familiar with it.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? A multimillionaire kills wrestling champ. I mean, it would seem to me that was sort of tabloid heaven, all around the world in some ways.
Yeah, it's a little mysterious that it wasn't a bigger story. I mean, it was a hot story for a moment, but there was not a lot of deep coverage of it. It went away pretty quickly.
So you were intrigued by the story, you ran with it, you developed it. Obviously financing came along at some point. So you spent how long in getting to the stage where you were ready to think about shooting a film?
It was, I learned about the story 8 years ago and committed to doing it immediately. I just was very attracted to the bizarreness of it and the themes that seem to be running underneath it. I think I'm attracted to these characters who are outsiders, people who end up in worlds where they don't really belong. And I think all my films have that kind of theme. These bizarre ambitions by protagonists who I believe that if they can accomplish, their ambition, that they'll somehow remedy the damages of their life or something. And I researched it and flew around and met everybody, and it took a couple of years to get a script to the place where we could begin getting practical with it. And at that point, it began a 2-year effort that would end in failure of trying to, find the support for it, in which time I, conceded that it was not possible and put it down and found something else to be passionate about, which was Moneyball. But as soon as Moneyball was winding down, I picked it up again and started searching for support. And by that time, Megan Ellison had begun producing films, and I can pretty confidently say, had it not been for her, the film could not have been made.
Okay. Let me bring Steve in here. Steve, the world knows you've made your name primarily with comic roles, although those of us who are fans of Little Miss Sunshine would say your performance in that suggests there are many other strings to your bow. I think you've proved it beyond doubt here. But were you surprised? Were you surprised to be offered this role, which on the face of it looks like a huge departure for you?
Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised to have been asked to meet with Bennett. Apparently my agent was the one who initially threw my name into the hat, and I wasn't actively pursuing this movie or any movie like it. So yeah, I was sent the script. I read it. Bennett and I met, and then I was offered the part. But yeah, I was surprised because it wasn't necessarily anything that was on my radar at the time.
Bennett, let me ask you, what was your thinking in casting Steve as DuPont?
you know, what happens when a film is trying to get made is that every agent in town knows that a film is casting, and lots of names begin to accumulate on lists and get sent along. And so there were dozens of names, and I think Steve's name entered the list later. But if the role is for a character who's between the ages of, you know, 47 and 67 and a million other things, oh, I've got clients like that. That's not to say that Steve's agent wasn't, you know, savvy about it, but it is to say that there were lots of names, and I'd considered lots of names. And when Steve's name cropped up, I was awfully familiar with what I did not want. And he immediately passed through, you know, the original criteria, and all the other names began to move away. But what it was about Steve, other than the fact that I think he's a great actor and mesmerizing to watch and very particular, is that everything I had learned about DuPont suggested that people underestimated what was inside of him. And I think because of the opportunities that Steve had as an actor, that opinions had formed about, you know, what to expect. And as Steve put it, when we began talking, Steve said, you know, I've only ever played characters with mushy centers. And DuPont does not have a mushy center. He seems to have a mushy center, but in fact, there's something very sharp and dangerous inside there. And I like the idea that the casting would facilitate a similar feeling towards the character that people had towards DuPont, which is some kind of belief that the situation is benign. You know, it's awkward, it's weird, maybe it's creepy, but ultimately not dangerous, and allow you to justify what you're seeing and why people stayed on the farm as things ratcheted up. And as Steve very eloquently put it last week, when the murder happens, it's something that should be shocking but ultimately not surprising.
Steve, can I just ask you? I mean, did you get a chance to see, I don't know, video footage of DuPont or anything like that to capture his essence? I mean, there's something that's very striking about the man. The way he talks, for instance, it seems very distant. I mean, it's almost as though his sentences float away into nothingness, almost as though he's not in the room. I mean, did he really speak in that manner?
He did have a very specific way of talking and a specific demeanor, and he had a specific look as well. I think just his physicality was very off-putting to many people. There was footage of him. He had commissioned a documentary on himself, and one of a couple, actually. And the most interesting footage there was the raw footage that he didn't want people to see, because that showed a side of him that was not his public persona, not the persona that he wanted to project at all. And there was, as Bennett said, there was a sharper edge to that guy, and a less tolerant person, and a more abrasive, more volatile person. And you could just see little hints of it here and there, but the way he spoke to the documentarian and the way he spoke to the camera crew and the way he went through in his head what he wanted to say, and how he planned out how he wanted. He had a very specific idea of how he wanted people to perceive him. And to get a little glimpse of that was helpful. And also there was footage on him and how he moved and how he spoke. He did have a very halting way of talking, and I think that served to kind of draw people in a certain way. And he would force people to wait until he finished.